Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do an unboxing of No Retreat, The Russian Front, GMT Games 2011 game of the Eastern Front in World War II, designed by Paradis. Now this is a very accessible, fast-playing game that's come highly recommended to me. Let's jump in and take a look at the components and give some initial impressions. All right, let's jump in and get started. Now, some first general impressions. I've read through the rulebook and I've looked through the components before I've done this. And I think the big impressions I've got of the game are fun, accessible, and fun decisions. I feel like there's a lot of mechanics that are designed, and the way the game has been designed is to encourage the player, to challenge the player with creative mechanics that allow them to solve problems in a lot of different ways to make fun decisions. So that's kind of the big impression I have, is this is a game that's going to be a lot of fun decision making, which of course is the heart of many good games. Now, there's also some obvious mechanic hints along these lines. It's a low stacking game, so you've got 1 to 2 counters per hex, depending upon the time of the game in the side. Only 70 counters to simulate the entire 4-year campaign, which is, again, all kinds. You can sense this emphasis on playability and accessibility, on keeping things moving. There is a full campaign game. There's also tournament rules and then 5 scenarios in the game. We'll take a look at those as we go forward. I do find it curious, given how colorful and how accessible the game is, that in this choice of this cover image, which I find kind of stark and bleak, and of course it was a bleak campaign, but just in terms of the way the game is designed, I feel like this cover image doesn't really match the design of the game so well, but that's just probably my own personal flair. It's also worth noting that as I'm creating this in October of 2021, GMT Games is releasing a game called Absolute War, also designed by Paradis, also a game on the Eastern Front conflict. And my sense is that, so this is 10 years later, he's had 10 years to think about this design in this series, and my general reaction is that the this new series of games, this new game on the same conflict, is designed as kind of a very newbie-friendly game that even simplifies some of the mechanics in this game more. So I'm very curious to take a look at that game as well. So let's jump in now and take a look at the backside. First up, it's a 2-inch game, nice and heavy because it's got a mounted map inside. If we take a look at the back of the box, there's probably a few things to talk about here. It doesn't mention how long it takes to play a campaign game. My sense is you could play it in a long evening, and you could play some of the shorter scenarios, which are just 3, 4, 5 turns and stuff like that, in perhaps a couple hours or so. So I feel like it's a game that's very manageable within a relatively reasonable time frame of play there. Now, the time scale in the game itself is 2 months per turn. So again, 4 years, 2 months per turn. You can do the math there. You're looking at about 20-something turns for the full campaign game. Each hex is 60 miles across, 100 kilometers. Now, on the front here, it does mention that the complexity is a 4 out of 9 on the GMT scale. After having read the rules, I think for me, the complexity is probably a little bit higher than that, and I'll explain more why as we look at the rule book and things. And then the solitaire suitability, it says 5, which is medium out of 9, of course, but there's also from the C3I magazine, there are SoloBot rules, AI rules that you can use. So I would push this much higher now after having kind of taken a look at that to probably the 8 or 9 range because of that solitaire system that's been subsequently designed for this game. So if you are a solo player, this might be a game that you want to look at. We can see cards here, and we'll talk about those. It is very much a card-driven experience as well. So now let's jump in without further delay and dig in and take a look at the components here. We pop this open. So we have 2 document series. We have the rule book and then the scenario booklet. And let's take a look at the rule booklet first. It weighs in at 24 pages, and these are mostly rules, except for like the last 2 pages, which are a combined example of play. This is a full rule book on the game, which is one of the reasons why I think that 4 rating strikes me as maybe a little bit light. I mean, there's quite a bit here. The text is pretty big. There's a lot of graphics. There's a lot of kind of aids to help learn and a lot of examples of play that are giving. So it feels to me like a very well organized and a very well designed rule book in terms of supporting the learning of play. But the reason why I think it's higher for me, at least in terms of how I read it, is that, and this is again probably speaking more to my experience as a wargamer than the average person's experience, but I was away from wargaming until about 6 months ago for about 20, 25 years. So card-driven games are still something that I'm wrapping my head around. And in this game, you've got card-driven games that have events on them, or you can also use the cards to upgrade units and do other things with units. So there's, integrating that into play. And then here's the section on combat, which is the other point I was thinking of. You're allowed in a turn to make a limited number of attacks, and you're going to designate those attacks. Then the non-phasing player can influence a turn by demanding some counter-attacks. And then there can be some back and forth with each combat as well that could leave leftover effects for the next phase of the game. So I feel like there's a lot of little things in here that they're not complex. They're not overly challenging, but they're just so novel to me that it's going to take me a while to wrap my head around them in terms of seeing how they play out. So I'm really excited to start playing this game because as I was reading through, it's like, wow, I haven't seen this done before, which to me makes it feels like, oh, this is a really creative approach to a game on the Eastern Front. And having said that, a lot of these concepts, of course, card-driven mechanics and stuff like that, are not new to games, but they're ones that I'm not extraordinarily familiar with, having been away from wargaming for a while. So I feel like part of the element is that it's novel in general, and there's just a lot of creativity applied to the mechanics and thinking in the game, and then part of it is that it's novel to me as well. So because of that, I think it's going to take me a little while to wrap my head around the game. Let's take a look now, though, at the scenarios. There's the campaign game, 5 scenarios as I mentioned, and then the tournament scenario. In the scenario ones, of course, are shorter. These show the startup positions. Again, you're looking at relatively few units here. It's just not a lot of congestion. Again, very low stacking. So a system that's going to be very visually easily to kind of parse and figure out what you want to do, but yet mechanics then are going to allow you the creativity of a lot of different ways that you could approach those. And again, full color mat, very well designed and very well done. So this scenario book, about half of it goes through with the different scenarios, and then you get a designer's note section. And I haven't read this yet. I'm really curious to read this to kind of get some insight into what Carl Paradis was thinking as he was creating this game, because again, it strikes me as a game that is very creative in its approach to a hex encounters experience. So I'm looking forward to that. Then some player's notes, which kind of give you some different strategy and things like that, and some thoughts. And then another longer example of play. So we have just some more rules explanations, which I think are going to be helpful for me in terms of parsing some of the finer details of some of the new mechanics that are in this game too. So a lot of support for learning in these documents, and I like the fact that there are multiple scenarios as well. I mentioned the AI bot, and this is, I don't know if I got this off the GMT Games website or from Board Game Geek, but this is the Solitaire expansion rulebook. And it's basically 4 pages or so. I'll put a close-up up here too that explains how the AI bot works. And one of the interesting things about this that's different than I've seen before is that depending upon the situation in the game, you can be asked to switch sides. So you might be playing the Germans for a while to a certain point, and then once things get to a certain circumstantial plays, the game's going to say, okay, now you have to play as the Russians, and we're going to use the AI rules to generate the German movements and attacks. So I'm really curious to see how that plays. I think as a first game, I'm going to probably try it, set it up for a few nights, and play just a straight-up 2-player game, Solitaire, to kind of get a sense for how it works. But it is kind of an interesting. I'm very curious to see how that Solitaire system works in play as well. Now, I got this game used again on Board Game Geek, so all the components have been opened up already. But let's take a look at the cards here. Very creative, I like, in terms of the events and things like that. And as, again, I mentioned before, some of the cards, you can use cards to kind of upgrade units as well. You can use cards in a lot of different ways in addition to playing the event. And each card has a German event at the top and a Russian event at the bottom. Some of them are limited by when you can play them, in particular as the history of the event and some of the pressures on Germany and opportunities to the Soviet Union evolved. The 1945 has some cards that are taken out of play and then some additional cards that are added into play. But I'm really curious to see how the cards work in terms of the combat and the flow and the movement, and like thinking about when you would want to be using the event on the card and when you just want to discard the card to upgrade some kind of a unit in some way, shape, manner, or form too. So I'm looking forward to that. Here are the counters though. Let's take a look at those. I'll show some close-ups on these because again, these are all punched already. Now, this is a game, if you've got older eyeballs, this is a good game for you because all of the counters here, and as we take a look at the map, we'll see this too, 3/4 inch counters and inch wide hexes on the map. So big print, really easy on the eyes. All the counters two-sided. With information on both sides. Sometimes there are little bit rule aids on the back side, so when you flip it over, you can see what to do in that particular circumstance. Here are the Russian counters, and again, there's not many of these. The other thing that's nice about these, always an appreciated touch, they've been pre-clipped, so they come curved already, so you don't have to break out the counter clipper to adjust the edges of the counters here. Now, here are the markers for different situations that are going on in the game, and I'll show a close-up of these as well. So, basically, again, not a tremendous amount of clutter or overwhelming amount of counters here. Very manageable in terms of its counter total to play with. We get 2 dice, yellow and red. I love the color scheme there. And now let's dig into our player aids. 2 of these are exactly alike. And I guess I can show both here, and I'll show some close-ups of these too. This has the turn record track, which I believe is also on the map too. We'll see that in a moment. And here we have on this side the train effects chart and the turn record chart. And you can see as you go through that one of the things that I thought was kind of fun as I was reading through the rules is that each turn feels kind of different. So you're going to have events that happen that are going to influence your game based on what was happening globally in the war and different things as the war progressed. So a lot of times the turn itself seems to have some kind of a unique element to it. And then you're going to have some shifts too, where the initiative shifts from the German side to the Soviet side as well. And again, I like the colors here, and this is the sense that I get from it. It's just a very inviting color palette that they've chosen to use. And we have the train effects chart here too. Here's the combat results tables. Very interestingly, the combat results, there's a different table for the Axis and for the Soviet Union. So the Axis used this top one and the Soviet Union uses the bottom one. So different results depending upon which side is attacking. And now our last thing, which I think visually is my favorite element of the game, and I'll show this on an overview rather than just trying to kind of overwhelm your eyeballs on here. So I'll pull back and show a screenshot of this. Here is the game map. I mean, this is a mounted map that's like, it's a real mounted map. I mean, this is just beautiful and gorgeous. A lot of the player aids around the outside and things like that. So you've got the combat results table, the turn sequence mark, and just, it's very clear what a hex is. I feel like this is one of the most beautiful maps that I've seen for a war game since I've kind of jumped back into the hobby here. Just really liking the visual appeal and heft to it. There's a sequence of play on it. A lot of boxes for controlling the flow of units that have been removed from play and such as well. So there we go. We have taken a look at No Retreat, the Russian Front. Again, this was a game that came very highly recommended to me for a playable game. And there are other games in the series, some of which I've heard varying degrees are kind of... This one in particular within this series seems to be what I've heard is the highlight of the series. Not that any of the other are bad or anything like that, but this is where the series seems to really shine in terms of representing this conflict. So I'm really looking forward to getting this to the table. And I think with that, we've gone through everything. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed this, please give the video a thumbs up, as that helps the algorithms on the channel and stuff like that. It helps it bring it in front of more people. And if you are new to the channel, please consider subscribing. About 40% of the content is war game and historical game related, with unboxing and a lot of playthroughs and reviews as well. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. Have a great game. And if you have the game, let me know what you think. And if you don't have the game, are you thinking on getting it? And how, if you are familiar with it, how do you think this game will compare to the new game, Absolute War, coming out on the same conflict by the same designer? Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. Have a great day. Bye.